Okay, we're live.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Our presentation today is on the UML component diagram, and we will be explaining what it is, how it works, the upsides, downsides of the UML diagram, and then also how it applies to our SDD and when we should use it. Next slide, please. So first of all, what is a component? So the UML component diagram is made up of components, and a component can mean several different things depending on the context of the UML diagram. So it could be the classes involved in your object-oriented program. It could be the files that are organized within it. It could be a library. It could also be a database. So on and so forth. But essentially, it's just the physical aspects of the product that we are trying to create, and then the diagram itself shows a relationship between those. Next slide. And then the diagram itself, obviously, as I just mentioned, is made up of these components. And essentially, what the UML component diagram is a description of the relationship between the components in the product itself. So for example, there can be multiple UML component diagrams within a product. We'll show you an example of that in a little bit, but you could have a component diagram specifically for the database that shows the tables that will be necessary in the database. And then you can also have an overall UML component diagram that describes the whole product, how like the client interacts with the server, that interacts with the database, etc. And then we'll show you an example here in just a second on the next slide. So go ahead and go to the next slide. We have an example here from the SDD. This is the one that I actually made this last week during our initial setup of the database. These are the three tables, and this is pretty basic. We'll probably get more detailed as we do more work in the coming weeks, but this is a good example of kind of how a UML component diagram can work. So here we have the user table, an account settings table, and a transaction table. And each table is a component that describes the different pieces of data that will be collected within those components. And then also we have the arrows that show that there's a relationship where every transaction is related to a specific user, and every account and its settings is also related to a specific user. And then now we will talk more about the upsides, downsides, and when is best to use this diagram.
Alrighty, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about the upsides of a UML component diagram. So the component diagram is a special kind of diagram in UML. The purpose is also different from all other diagrams discussed so far. So it does not describe the functionality of the system, but it describes the components used to make those functionalities. So from that point of view, component diagrams are used very well to visualize the physical components in a system. And like we talked about earlier, what Andrew talked about, these components are things such as libraries, packages, files, etc. So it's the physical components of a software platform. So component diagrams are very important from implementation perspective. So the implementation team of an application should have a proper knowledge of the component details. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the downsides of the UML component diagram. So what are the downsides? So first off, when we talk about a downside to UML in general, it's growing complexity and size. So many in software actually believe that you can communicate design ideas just as easily using simple boxes in a program such as Microsoft PowerPoint or Word. And they feel that it's much simpler to look at, and overall, some people will be able to understand it much better. A UML can also tend to overcomplicate things and make them appear threatening or challenging to understand. And like I said, this can deter some. When we look at all the types of UML diagrams, the most commonly used are normally class diagrams, sequence diagrams, and use case diagrams. So UML component diagram is not heavily used. Um, I've actually never learned about it or used it so far in my studies. So I think it's not as heavily used, and that can be a slight downside to a component diagram. So, how can we recommend how and when to use UML component diagrams? And I think the best way to do this is by better helping you understand what it is doing. The purpose of using a component diagram is different than most other UML diagrams. It is not to describe the functionality of the system, but better yet, to describe the components of the system to make those functionalities. So they're solely used to visualize the physical components in a system. So when should we use component diagrams? So anytime we need to visualize the components of a system, such as the files, libraries, packages, etc. Also, when we construct executables by using forward and reverse engineering, makes it a good time. It's important to use the UML component diagrams so that those working on software can better understand how these components are to be organized. And this is a major step in project execution. It's important to understand exactly where all the components are located in a software program. And here is our sources, and that's everything. Thank you.